Good evening and welcome to the 7th Annual Najarian Human Rights Lecture given in conjunction with the Armenian Heritage Foundation. Please refer to your programs where we recognize and have listed all of the volunteers who have made this program possible and our co-sponsor organizations, universities, and other supporting groups. Without your support, your energy, and your expertise, these lectures could not be possible. Thank you. The Armenian Heritage Park Foundation presents these lectures as a gift to the city of Boston on behalf of the Armenian immigrants, such as my parents and George's parents, who sought and found refuge here from the genocide that was taking place in their homeland. It is our way of saying thank you to the community that saved them. Thus, these lectures are on human rights issues of today that affect us all, globally, nationally, and locally. We started with Kerry Kennedy's Speaking Truth to Power, to the genocide in Rwanda, to modern forms of slavery, trafficking, and the human rights of journalists. We hope we lived up to our mandate so far. Last year, we dedicated the lecture to the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide. We paid tribute to the Boston humanitarians that stood in this very room in the 1890s, decrying the atrocities against the Armenians and organizing aid. Faneuil Hall was the place they gathered. It was, after all, here in the 1700s where resistance to British taxation began and where the seeds of the revolution were planted. And later, in the 1840s, where the abolitionists met and called dramatically to an end to slavery. And where the suffragettes in the 1870s gathered, women speaking from this very podium for the first time ever. This history is why our lecture is held in Faneuil Hall. It is a place where crowds of New Englanders gathered not only to learn about human rights abuses, but to be called to action. And tonight, we will hear about one of the most, if not the most important human rights issue facing our country today, that of racism. I personally could not be more pleased and honored to have Mr. Harry Belafonte to address us. Justice and equality, inspiring activism. How fortunate we are tonight. Welcome, Mr. Belafonte, to Boston. Welcome to Faneuil Hall, and thank you for accepting our invitation to speaking to us tonight. To introduce Mr. Belafonte, we are very happy to have Mr. Roger Brown, President of Berklee College of Music. President Brown has had a long and varied career, not in music as such, and I cleared this with him, but as a drummer. Well, it is music, but his career has not been in music. But his work has been primarily in humanitarian work, interestingly, especially in his early years. For many years, he headed food distribution programs for both CARE and UNICEF, and at one point was overseeing food distribution to 25,000 people a day. And in famine-ravaged Sudan, he and his wife directed the relief efforts for Save the Children Federation, again, saving thousands of lives under difficult conditions. His career has also included the founding and developing with his wife of the well-known innovative child care centers, Bright Horizons. In 2004, he accepted the position as president of Berklee, bringing many transformational changes to that institution. The recipient of many awards, I am so very pleased to invite him to this podium to introduce our speaker, Mr. Belafonte. President Brown. I'm going to do this.
Good evening, everyone. What a great evening, what a great guest speaker we have. First, I want to thank the Najarians for their contribution to the city of Boston. Living in Belmont, I know the legendary contributions of the Armenian community to our city and to the world. Speaking as a drummer, I would have to say the undisputed #1 contribution is the Zildjian Cymbal Company. Founded in 1625, perhaps the oldest operating company on the planet. And one of the great perks of my job is I get to tour the factory and pick any cymbal that I want. As a young man in Georgia, I would go to the music store and stare at these very expensive cymbals that were way beyond my ability to afford them. So that would be one great contribution of the Armenian community. The other, for those of us in the Watertown, Belmont area, has to be Vicky Lee Boyajian's coffee shop. I'm also her number one customer. And then, speaking of Bright Horizons, the very first Bright Horizons Center we opened was at a project that George did in 1987 at the One Kendall Square Office Park. They took a chance on I was a 30-year-old entrepreneur just back from Africa, and thank you, George, for believing in us. But these lectures are a very important part of the culture of Boston, and as you've heard, Boston has a history of being a leader in thinking about human rights, so we owe it to ourselves to continue that tradition. Harry Belafonte. Belafonte means beautiful fountain. And fountain really means a source. The root of fonte, font, is the source. And he has been the source of so much beauty, not only in his music, but in his activism. His first appearance singing before an audience in the late 40s was auspicious. He was accompanied by the Charlie Parker Band. Do we have any jazz fans here? Okay, Charlie Parker, Miles Davis, and Max Roach. That's a good way to start. It was an auspicious early marker on the timeline of Harry's epic career as a singer, actor, social activist that has spanned more than 6 decades. As an artist, there are few who can boast of a career of equal depth and breadth. His breakthrough album, Calypso, is the first album by a single artist to sell 1 million copies in the United States. It also sold 1 million in England. It's ranked #4 on Billboard's Top 100 album list, and his subsequent monster hits, Deo and Jamaica Farewell, established him as the king of Calypso. As an actor, he has appeared in dozens of theatrical, concert, and documentary films and has been featured on or hosted on countless TV shows. Along the way, he earned 6 gold records, numerous awards and honors, including Grammy, Tony, Emmy. He was the first African American to win an Emmy, the NAACP Image Award, the BET Humanitarian Award, as well as the Kennedy Center honors, and I could go on and on. But to focus on Harry's music and acting career is to miss perhaps his most impactful contribution to society. In the 50s, Harry met Martin Luther King Jr. and became a vital force in the civil rights movement. In a recent Billboard article, U.S. Congressman John Lewis was quoted as saying, quote, "Whenever there was a need, I would just hear Dr. King say, 'Call Harry.'" He paid to bail Dr. King out of Birmingham City Jail in 1963 and raised funds to release other civil rights protesters. Acting on his deep commitment to seeking racial equality, Harry also financed the Freedom Riders, voter registration drives, and more. He was among the organizers of the historic August 28, 1963 March on Washington and was there alongside Dr. King when he delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. In 1965, Harry assembled Johnny Mathis, Tony Bennett, Joan Baez, Sammy Davis Jr., Nina Simone, and others on an outdoor stage constructed of caskets from a local African-American-owned funeral home to perform for those marching from Selma to Montgomery to raise awareness of the difficulties faced by African Americans in the Deep South. Throughout the 1980s, Harry lent his celebrity clout to helping the people of Africa. He proposed the idea of enlisting top musicians to write and sing We Are the World. And I have a personal connection to this. I was living and working in a refugee camp in eastern Sudan, serving Ethiopians and Eritreans in 1985, and someone brought a Sony Walkman, remember those? With a cassette in it, and played this song for me called We Are the World. The Sudan is the hottest country on earth. It got to be as hot as 126 degrees Fahrenheit. It's dry, it's somewhat desolate. And here I was in this rural refugee camp, hearing all the musicians I loved and admired so much singing a song to raise awareness and money to support the thing that I was there doing. And it was so moving. Little did I know, because of his humility, I didn't know for many years that the originator of the idea behind that and the organizer of that whole project was Harry Belafonte. And he's so modest. He's such a modest person that he didn't need to take credit for it. He just made it happen the way he's done so many things in his life and career. And to really show you what he's made of, there are a lot of musicians who will sing on a benefit song. But Harry Belafonte jumped on an airplane and flew to that same refugee camp and visited our program in Gargour in eastern Sudan and walked through the camp and met the people working there and met our staff and encouraged them. And I tell you, that is very rare when people actually take the time out of their busy lives to go to the place that they're trying to help. While Harry has retired from performing, he continues his advocacy of civil rights and various political causes. In 2013, he founded the social justice nonprofit Sankofa, which has raised over $1.8 million since its inception. Just this past month, as he is approaching his 90th birthday, he held a festival of music, art, and justice in Chattahoochee Hills, Georgia, miles from where I grew up, if you haven't noticed. I tend to tell people I'm from South Boston, but they're not usually convinced. That featured artists like Common, John Legend, Macklemore, and attracted 22,000 attendees, with all profits going to his nonprofit. Harry is a role model for so many of us who care about human rights issues. And this is what I would say about Harry. He is not an artist who took an interest in activism. He is an activist who happened to be a brilliant musician. And for him, activism has always come first. And he's made a huge difference in the world, and he's an inspiration to students of music everywhere, because it shows them that their music is not just entertainment, it's the way we change the world. In 2014, Berklee College of Music presented an honorary doctorate to Mr. Belafonte. I guess I should call him Dr. Belafonte. We had a magnificent benefit concert in his honor, and I can tell you the students who were part of that are still on fire about what they learned about his example. So please welcome the person who I believe is the greatest artistic activist in the history of our country, Harry Belafonte.
I didn't know I did all that. First of all, let me just express my joy and my great sense of opportunity to be here in Boston, where my wife spent most of her early years as a student and living here. I have heard so much about Boston that I thought it was about time I paid a visit, considering the fact that I enjoyed sponsoring so many students that came here to Berkeley to study, many of whom played in my band over the years and have gone on to do wonderful things in the world of song and lyric and music. When I got the invitation to come, I was compelled because during the years of internship by a lot of the students who came here, they kept telling me what a remarkable institution this was and how thankful they were that they had the opportunity to come. And they gave me an opportunity to write eloquent letters to those who underwrote and sponsored those students to come to Berkeley. And so I looked back at my life and I thought that nothing could be more poetic than to, almost at the age of 90, finally pay a visit under the sponsorship of Berkeley. I can take all those musicians and tell them about this evening. Mr. Brown, in describing my presence in the world, has pointed out that I was not an artist who became an activist, but that I was an activist who became an artist. That influence was in great part due to my mother. She was an immigrant woman. She came from the island of Jamaica. She came to America looking for the great American dream and failed to find it. But in the course of her experience while living here, she was overwhelmed by what she saw in America, not just by the size of the nation and the greatness of its image, but the fact that it was so diverse, that there were just so many people that made up what this country was all about. And she took great joy in the fact that she was not the only strange one, as she would say. She had a thick Jamaican accent, and she always wished for her children that they would benefit themselves of the opportunity to become educated. That wish was not completely fulfilled when she brought me into the world, because my earliest years I struggled with a severe round of a disorder called dyslexia. And in my youth, although away from the formality of academics, I revealed a kind of a spunkiness and a kind of a willingness to become engaged. Teachers thought that I was distracted in the classrooms because I was willful. Nobody knew what dyslexia was back in those days. It had not been discovered or defined. And I was punished quite frequently for being delinquent. I found my attention order suffering greatly. And as a consequence, I had to find another way in which to satisfy my need to know, my need to compete, my need to belong. And I found that in that world of music resided such opportunity. Thankfully, my mother took me back when I was quite young. I was born in New York. She took me back to Jamaica, and in the midst of that culture, I learned a lot about the world. I learned a lot about peasant life. I learned a lot about the struggles of poverty, the cruelty of people who were colonized by the British. And in that environment and in that struggle and with all the things and challenges that were put before me, I had to find a way in which to survive. I dropped out of school, my first year in high school, and I just couldn't cut it. Yet I wanted very much to be a part of the normality of my surroundings, but I didn't qualify, and as a consequence I was left out or left behind. And in the midst of that condition, my mother tried to find a way in which to bring peace to this troubled youngster. And in the process, she told me about diversity. She told me about difference. She told me about all the things in the world that would challenge my path, and with things that I could do to meet those challenges. Early on, as a domestic, she came back home with many tales about the rich. She serviced them. She was a domestic worker. And she would come home and tell me the stories of this family or that family that she worked for, what strange languages they spoke and strange things they talked about. She told me of their humor and their conflicts. She also told me of how much she found it difficult coming from an island, not being familiar with the culture, and constantly being exposed to the opportunities that were available to those who were at the lowest rung of the ladder. In that process, I learned a lot about the global order. I learned about colonialism. I learned about what the British were doing to those of us who were the subjects of colonialism. And as a consequence, became in a very early time in my life curious about war, curious about killing, curious about people who seemed to find such reward in violence as a solution to conflict and to problems. And both from my mother's perspective and those whom I was lucky enough to grow up in the midst of, in my community in Harlem, I was able to find opportunity and paths in places that were before me. I volunteered to be in the Second World War in the United States Navy, not just to get away from poverty and to have a place of discipline and a place with purpose. The Second World War carried with it the concepts of noble purpose. The stories that most stuck with me were the stories of the Jews, the stories of crematoriums and gas chambers and Kristallnacht and all the prices that were paid by people who suffered only because they were different. And I found that those of us who were different shared a commonality in our difference. And as a consequence, I began to seek out others who maybe had stories to tell that were similar to my own, but also stories that were rewarded by coincidences that took place in the lives of those who were disenfranchised. I often say if I were to take one word in the English language that would describe my path in life, and the word that most enabled me to meet the challenges of life, it would be coincidence. A lot that happened to me I never planned. Something happened, it came my way, it revealed itself, and I advantaged the moment. When I came out of the United States Navy, my participation in that war was not just to meet the enemy and to be victorious in the battlefield. It was because I and some others really felt that the destiny of Black Americans was deeply tied to America's success in this confrontation with the issues of race and discrimination. And in the armed forces, I ran into men and some women who taught me and showed me a path that led to my interest in theater. When I came out, because I was a high school dropout, I had no skills, and the best I could do to become a janitor's assistant. And I took that job with a great sense of opportunity, and I'd become the best janitor any building in New York had ever seen. My brass would shine brighter than others. My hallways were more spick and span, and for my careful repair of things that were askew in apartments, I was rewarded with all sorts of things. One particular reward was that having done a repair in an apartment, I was given 2 tickets as a gratuity to the theater, and I was really pissed off. Because here I was looking for some geets, as we would say, a buck or two, that's what I needed. I really didn't need 2 tickets to a theater. My first question is, what the hell is a theater? And what do people do there? I knew about structures that housed culture, because I was a great lover of music, and I went to the Apollo Theater on 125th Street with great regularity to listen to the great jazz musicians of the day and wallow in the joy of their presentations. But in this instance, when I was given these 2 tickets to the theater, I went away a bit disgruntled. But after a couple of days, I decided, watching those tickets languish with no place to rest, I decided to use them. So I went to this place that the tickets were for. The American Negro Theater was what it was called. It was in the basement of a theater in Harlem. And in this theater, I came to see the wonder of the art of acting, the art of theater. First of all, the space in which we performed was about half the size of this. And when I walked in, and I could tell by the silence in the room that something reverential was taking place. I'd never been in a place where more than 30 Black people gathered together and didn't make some kind of noise. The silence was somewhat intimidating. The only other place I knew that got this quiet was church. And I don't mean the Black church because I was born a Catholic. I later on fixed that, but when I went to this place and saw this silence, I knew I had expectations. What was I waiting for? The curtain opened, and I think my first experiences with an epiphany was that moment The lights went down, the curtain went up, and I saw young men and women walk on a stage and began to recite poetry, telling stories about the life the characters in the play were experiencing. The play was called Home is the Hunter. It was a story about returning black GIs to the United States. And I was looking at this place of theater, this place of invention, this place of the manipulation of words. And I found much of my own life being revealed by what the actors were saying. This play was about a black soldier coming back from war. After all, when the Allies came together and decided to resist Hitler and fascism, they did so with the use of lofty words. We were making the world safe for democracy. We want to make it free. People have the right to self-determination. And all those words lingered happily in my brain as I thought, well, this war seems to have big purpose. And I participated in it willingly and fully. And at the end of that war, when America rejoiced in its victory, it was an interesting thing at the Feast of Victory. There was no presence of black people. We didn't have the right to vote, and we just won the war for others to have that right. I couldn't make the kind of choices that I wanted to make because the oppositions of race played a big part, and I resented it. I didn't understand why, just based on color, there should be such an absence of opportunity. And I rebelled against it. And like a bunch of other young men, we were provoked in becoming, which was my first overture to activism. Very little is known about the history of what happened with black servicemen who returned from the war. The list is large and varied and extremely cruel for the number of black men who had served in the war, who while in uniform, returning home in many areas where they had grown up and lived, had accepted the fact that the war was to free all people except us. We were being lynched and beaten by the thousands. And when I say that, I'm amazed at how many Americans either resist that truth or would say that I was miscarrying the information. In this theater that I came to with the miscarriage of information, a man came to visit us one day in a play that we'd selected. His name was Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson was the mightiest tree in our forest. He was a man of incredible power, great stature, remarkable intellect, and his art was really quite exceptional. His voice was not just a great voice, a great instrument, but it's also what that voice said in the songs that it sang. His songs have said something that struck a chord deep in the human heart, in the human mind. And I saw in him something I wanted to be. And I saw in the theater a place that I wished to reside. And so, day after day, I went back to this little theater, wishing desperately to become part of the rituals that made up that institution, and I would do anything just to be a part of something that was about something. When I understood the depth of what I had stepped into, my teacher was a man from Germany. Actually, he was from Austria. His name was Erwin Piscotta. He had escaped the Nazis, had come to America, and was sought after by great institutions of learning because they had created a theater in Europe which was the most avant-garde of all modern theater. Max Reinhardt, a great German theater with writers like Bertolt Brecht and others that made up the esteem of this great institution. And he came to America and opened a school, and luckily I was one of the students that had petitioned for entrance and was accepted. The plays that Erwin Piscotta put before the students all said something. No moment on the stage was wasted. It was about human life, human condition, truth, and I found in this environment the expressions of life and ideas that I deeply wanted to be a part of. So I took with great delight to the idea of being in this new institution. Until my first day in class, I looked around at the people who would be my classmates for the ensuing years, and I just looked at this rather motley crew, and I said, my God, this is an acting class, and these are people who think they're going to be stars and actresses. Oh, forget it. And I looked at them, and all of them had peculiar styles. Just to get the record straight, these classmates were Marlon Brando, Walter Matthau, Rod Steiger, Tony Curtis, better known as Bernie Schwartz. And with this class, that I looked around and saw nothing but failure in the future. Turned out to be the great molders of American theater culture and the impact that we had on our country. In this capacity, at the end of each class, the group of us went to a jazz nightclub just a block away from the school. It was within walking distance, a block and a half. The place was called the Royal Roost. It was a nightclub, a jazz club, and we went down every night to listen to the great jazz musicians of the day. Thelonious Monk, Bud Powell, Charlie Parker, Max Roach, Miles Davis. And night after night, sitting listening to these young men was a reward beyond description. God, they were inspiring. And after many nights of sitting listening to them, one night, the players had become very familiar with these students popping in and out. And I was asked by one of the musicians, his name was Lester Young, a great jazz saxophonist, watched us with curiosity night after night coming to this place because that same crew was part of the group. Marlon Brando, Walter Matthau, Rod Steiger, we're all sitting there keeping time and looking at with awe at what was being played by the musicians. And Lester Young said, where y'all come from? And I'd say, well, we're students. Students, huh? Uh-huh. What y'all study? I said, theater. You study theater? I said, yeah. He said, what do you study in theater? I said, study acting. He said, uh-huh. How you do that? And I couldn't describe it. Well, an actor, then a wonderful thought came to mind. Why don't you invite him to come see what you do? Then you don't have to explain it, you just show it. And sure enough, a bunch of us were in a play, Come See Us. It's called Of Mice and Men, written by a great American playwright named John Steinbeck. And the teacher who directed the play decided to have a character called the balladeer. And he used this balladeer as an ethereal force going through the play. And it was used for the transition of sets and mood. And this young creation by the director as the device for this play sang the songs that were given to him, and that the songs that this young character had to sing were songs written by Woody Guthrie and songs written by a man named Leadbelly. Yeah, Leadbelly. And I listened to these songs and just, wow. Anyway, after Lester came and saw the plays, I came back a few nights later, and we were talking. He said, that's a wonderful thing I saw when you all did Steinbeck. So that's how you study acting, huh? So I said, yes, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Then I began to tell him it's not so wonderful because I'd run out of funds, no more money. And he said, well, come on in and why don't you just sing a couple of songs? I said, sing a couple of songs for what? He said, well, you can work your way through school. I said, well, Mr. Young, I'm not a singer. He said, you're not? I said, I'm an actor. Little did I realize that at that moment I'd hit on a chord that would spell out the fact that not only was I an actor, but I was indeed one of the world's greatest actors. And once being interviewed, the journalist, I made that remark that I was not only an actor, but I thought one of the world's greatest actors. They said, no humility? I said, hardly necessary if you're the greatest. And he said, and why do you think you're the world's greatest actor? I said, well, only the world's greatest actor could have convinced you that I'm a singer. And in this platform, Lester arranged for me to get hired. I learned some songs, got a piano player by the name of Al Haig, who was a brilliant player. He played with Charlie's band, Charlie Parker. And not too long after this arrangement for me to become a singer, I began to find favor with the American public. I stopped not too long thereafter because I didn't feel I had the qualifications. Here I was studying Shakespeare and reading Luigi Pirandello, the great Italian writers, and Dostoevsky, and reading here George Bernard Shaw and Clifford Odets, and standing on stage singing Moon, June, Spoon didn't quite work, didn't challenge me in any way, so I left. And I opened a restaurant. And in this restaurant, it became the center for a lot of social challenge and debate and arguments. It's a hamburger joint. And it didn't stay open long. I went bankrupt. How can you go bankrupt selling hamburgers? Well, I made that remarkable discovery. You can. But fortunately for me, another coincidence was right down the street from where this restaurant was located was a nightclub named the Village Vanguard. And in this nightclub, coincidentally, there was a singer coming to town, and his name was Leadbelly. And there was another singer not too long after that coming to Woody Guthrie. I said, I know those guys. I sang their songs in the play that made me a great actor. And I went down and listened to Woody Guthrie and listened to Leadbelly, and I got hooked. I went down night after night and with great reverence listened to these men sing these songs that told the story of America, told the story of poverty, told the story of hate, told the story of joy, told the story of reward. It told so many stories, your head would spin with the choices that we were given. And so I perfected that craft. I worked very hard at trying to find out how to move the human heart and to touch the human mind with song. And not only to get an audience to listen to the songs, but better yet, to become inspired with what those lyrics had to say. It was through Paul Robeson that I met a man named Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois. And through these great educators, these great minds, I began to meet people in the theater that were activists. And I knew that that was where I wanted to be, and that's what I would use the craft to do. There was no idea about stardom because black artists had no such role models. We didn't have big stars then. We are overrun with them now. And not without disappointment. Because when I see young artists and they ask me, how did you do it? I said, I didn't do it, it did it. I was just an instrument through which things happened. And I enjoyed being that tool. I've always found that art and activism, when Robeson in his moments would tell us things like, artists are the gatekeepers of truth. When he made that remark, it was kind of, wow, that's a big chunk. The gatekeepers of truth. We are civilization's moral compass. Another kind of a big stab at, wow, gatekeepers of truth, moral compass, and perhaps the last of them was the radical spirit of the voice of civilization. It has been in that context that I have done what I have done. I found a way to use the stage, to use the idea of song, to instruct, and to use the platform and those who willingly followed, which turned out to be the audiences all over the world, because I began to sing in many languages, tell the stories of many different groups and tribes. And as a consequence, came to a place where one day, this boy from Harlem, whose father was an alcoholic, whose mother was cruelly put upon because of the absence of education and opportunity, that I was now at this point in my life with all of these rewards, I found my way into the White House, sitting with a young president named John Kennedy and his brother named Bobby, asking my opinion on human rights and issues on civil rights, because I was a friend of Dr. King's and Malcolm X, and I had committed myself to movement and struggle, and a globe of audiences willingly listened to those songs and rewarded me with their attendance. And the more radical I became, the more rewarded I became. And so when somebody says to me, "What are you doing these days?" I simply say, at the age of almost 90, I have one great preoccupation, and that is I am searching with great consistency for the rebel heart. What I think most grievous in this America of opportunity is that after a century almost of struggle, because I came in the world with Roosevelt, was tutored by his wife, Eleanor, who became an abiding friend. I watched her and listened to her as she struggled with writing the articles for the human rights of the world. She was a member of the United Nations. She wrote that charter which is used today to measure social conduct and civilization's best of itself. The rebel heart. I find that, especially among black artists, never before have we had such a harvest of popular and successful performers, and never have we been as absent from social truth and an opportunity to inspire people to say and do things, because we've taken art and turned it into an instrument of hedonist pleasure. We harvest all the rewards of an audience and their glee and their support of us, and we give nothing back. There are one or two exceptions. Guys like Common and Chuck D and others whom I work with all the time. We created an organization called Sankofa, and the purpose of this mythical bird, which comes from African mythology, it just says the task of the artist is to retrieve the egg before it falls to the ground. We must retrieve history and interpret it in a way that inspires people to be the best in themselves. Part of why I'm here tonight, and thank you very much for the invitation, is to help me find the rebel heart. Thank you.
Thank you. That was an amazing, amazing talk. I think that I'm glad that it's been videoed, because I'm going to have to listen, and it will be online for people to access in a couple of weeks. It's so important. You have given us, Mr. Belafonte, a perspective which we need to hear. And only someone with your vast experience, with your bright horizon, as I might use that phrase, with coming from where you have come to where you have achieved, to be able to inspire us to be the best that we possibly can be. I mean, that is really totally amazing. I have to say, I had no idea of your history, where you came from, and how this all happened. And I have a couple of more years, I hope. I'm going to work harder. Every time we think Sometimes we think, well, I've done enough, now I can sit back, I can just enjoy kind of this or that, enjoy the entertainment, and not work for a better world, not work to inspire and to do and to be the best that we can. That's a mistake, and I think that everybody here tonight has heard your call to action. And it is to the children who are here in this room as well, who will take that message. And we need to remember that we are blessed, we have so many gifts, we need to use those opportunities. Thank you so much. Thank you. And don't stop now.